without further ado, I'm going to ask Brad to come up to the stage. Brad, who is the CEO of Platinum Seed. Please give him a warm welcome.
Firstly, thanks for taking the time to come out tonight. Thanks for the introduction, Fred. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate the opportunity to be up on Heavy Chef stage again. Last time I was here, there wasn't actually a physical stage, so that's cool to see. Yeah, I know, that's awesome. So, as Fred said, I'm from a company called Platinum Seed. We're a digital growth agency, and we are here. We've partnered with World Wide Worx and Visa on a study to understand what the online e-commerce retail environment looks like in South Africa. And Arthur will be presenting the findings of that. But what I'm going to focus on is what is called new retail. And it's slightly more of a global trend in e-commerce at the moment, and maybe some of the learnings that we can start applying to Africa and South Africa in particular. So what I'd like you to do is, I'd like you to picture this. You're 26 years old. I'm sure some of you are enjoying that at the moment. And you live in China, and it's 6 o'clock in the morning, and you're already hard at work. Now, maybe 40 years ago, the reality might have been that you were working in a factory, working a field, or maybe hustling on the streets of Beijing. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce you to Yang. This is Yang. She also goes by Sunny on a microblogging platform in China called Weibo. And she's awake at 6 o'clock in the morning, and she's working hard. But her work comprises of wearing products and clothes that she's created, a brand that she's created, and she's going out on a photo shoot to have in front of landmarks in the Macau region of China, and she's getting professional photos done. Over and above this, in the rest of her day, she nurtures her 3 million fans that she has on Weibo, and she also manages her suppliers and her online e-commerce store. She sells her brand and other makeup and beauty products on a platform called Taobao, which is a Alibaba. I don't know how many people know Alibaba, but it's an Alibaba-owned marketplace in China. And recently, she took part in a festival called Singles Day. And in Singles Day, she managed to rack up $500,000 of sales in one day. So what Yang is, she is known as a Wang Hong in China, literally a person who's popular on the internet. And unlike Western counterpart influencers, Wang Hong, the phenomena of Wang Hong, which is now in its sort of third iteration and extremely successful, has grown specifically because of the market penetration and internet penetration usership in China. And I just want to put this in perspective for you quickly. Weibo, the app I was talking about earlier, the microblogging platform, has got 430 million active users. That is quite substantially more than the entire population of the US. So what is also important to understand is that what underpins the success of the Wang Hong phenomenon, I know that sounds like a rhyme, Wang Hong phenomenon, but what underpins it is that China has made it so easy for e-commerce to succeed in that country. They have really empowered the businesses there, like Alibaba, and the people, like Wang Hongs, to succeed and to do what they do best, which is sell and grow. So if we look at China, and I put there FTW, for those who don't know, is for the win, just for the non-millennials. So if you look at the global e-commerce market as it stands, it's probably the B2C market is probably expected at the end of this year to reach $2.8 trillion, of which China is going to be responsible for $1.4 trillion. Now, the big question I was asking is, why does China command over 40% of this market? Everyone, obviously, we always talk about Amazon, which is why I'm kind of focusing on China tonight for a change. So the first obvious one is everyone's going to go, oh, it's population. You're right, it is population. China's got 1.5 billion people. That's 21% of the world's population. You dig a little deeper, how many internet users do they have? They've got 800 million, 21% of the world's population. Yet they command over 40% of e-commerce sales. And there's predominantly two factors behind this. One, they've got a very, very fast growing middle class. And the second is that they've got a very tech-savvy youth. Out of those 800 million internet users, over 275 million are under the age of 25. So if we cross over the sea, depending on which side of the globe you want to go around to the US, things are slightly different. They might be at loggerheads, where e-commerce is either deemed friend or foe. On the one hand, it's been seen to be killing traditional brick and mortar. You've obviously seen a huge amount of closure of traditional retail going on in the US. But if you speak to any reputable or half-decent brand or retailer and ask them if e-commerce is part of their future strategy, they inevitably are going to say yes. Where China differs is that it's not an either-or situation for them. For China, it is about giving the best experience both in the real world and online world as possible, in something that Jack Ma has called a new retail, and something that he's called uni-channel, which is different to omni-channel. We'll get into that just now. So yeah, China. Sorry, I'm going to have to reference some notes here because I think I've been talking enough without them. So yeah, in terms of new retail, if we look at it, it's really created a great environment for Chinese e-commerce companies to grow and grow sustainably. So if we look at the growth compared to their US counterparts, I know this is a lot of numbers, so let's not focus on all of them. Let's just focus on the second row there, which is Alibaba. They've had 60% revenue growth in 1 year and 49% over 5 years, versus their counterpart, which is Amazon, or their US counterpart, Amazon, which has had 25% revenue growth in the last year and 18% over 5 years. If you start looking at profit margins, you can see that Amazon runs at a very low profit, notoriously low profit. The excuse is that they reinvest all their turnover. The truth might be slightly more tax implicated. Whereas Alibaba tends to focus a little bit more on profit. And I think this really goes down to the US culture, or the US tech culture. And the US tech culture is one that has been very, very difficult to replicate anywhere else in the world, despite many attempts. They've got a huge amount of access to very cheap capital, very forgiving investors when performance doesn't reign, and really what their investors chase is market cap, not necessarily profit alone. Whereas China has a much more, in my opinion, sustainable view of chasing both growth and profits. That doesn't mean that they don't invest their turnover, by the way. So if we look at the 5 reasons, or 5 sort of main reasons why China has succeeded so well, the first is personalized discovery. And what that really means is, that really talks about personalized marketing. Yes, Amazon users and other great e-commerce platforms in the US do use historical data, transactional data, searches to try serve out the most personalized marketing to you using AI. China adds, I think, an additional layer in that, in terms of their social media behavioral data, combined with transactional and sort of CRM data to make marketing really, really personalized. The second is their seamless sales. Platform integration in China is ubiquitous. Like, it doesn't matter where you are able to buy with almost literally one click. Whether you're on a gaming platform, whether you're in the news, whether you're on social media, you can literally buy anything you want with one click. So that is really talking to more than just omni-channel. In terms of content being king, we all know this, content is great. In China, there's a trend at the moment. They're moving over to a lot of live streaming, but they're also doing a lot of experimentation with augmented reality and virtual reality. An example of that is there's now an app called Mirror, where you can actually try on lipstick before purchasing it. So it'll actually show you what the lipstick looks like on your lips. Yeah, I haven't tried it, by the way. B2C innovation, I think, that just talks to, them being really... sorry, I just have to actually look at my notes here for this one. It really talks to them following trends on social media, using deep data analytics to understand their customers as opposed to just following transactional data. They actually keep a very strong ear to the ground on what is happening, and then they actually adapt very quickly to what their customers want. In terms of agile, flexibility, and speed, I don't think I need to tell you that China can pretty much manufacture anything. They can manufacture anything, and they can manufacture it really quickly. In fact, they can manufacture it so quickly that a lot of stores or e-commerce stores in China start selling before their product is even being made. In terms of flexibility and speed, they've got over 20,000 courier companies in China, which employ over 2 million people. So their fulfillment, their delivery, is just crazy in terms of their speed and flexibility. So, as you can tell, I'm pretty passionate about what China's doing in the e-commerce space. But maybe we should bring it closer to home, back to Africa. So, how many people have heard of Jumia? That's quite a low number. So Jumia was founded in Nigeria, and it is now operational in 14 different countries in Africa, and it's often considered the Amazon of Africa. It is the first African unicorn, and Fred, so that you don't have to look it up, a unicorn is a company that's valued at over $1 billion. So it is Africa's first unicorn, and it has got a range of 6 million products on its site from various traders, and it's looking to grow that to 12 million by 2020. Why I believe Jumia is not like Amazon is that I think it tends to be more like Alibaba, in that it tends to make operational challenges, it tends to turn operational challenges into opportunities and strategically use them to drive growth. And this is really what Jack Ma's New Retail is talking to. He talks about seamless integration across a supply chain between the real world and the online world. Jumia's CEO says that e-commerce in Africa is a solution, and that they are using all sorts of new ways to solve problems. And if we really look at these new ways, I'll give you 3 quick examples. Number one, they were one of the first companies to introduce cash payments. So if you ordered something, it gets delivered to your door, cash on delivery, because there's a huge population that's unbanked in Africa. There is also huge infrastructure problems and fulfillment, getting parcels to where they need to be. So they partner with a whole bunch of entrepreneurs and a whole bunch of people to be able to deliver products all over African countries to villages that don't even have names. The third thing that they do quite well is that they've got a platform where they've got sales agents that will actually buy a product on your behalf if you don't have internet access, or if you don't trust their platform enough, they'll buy it on your behalf and fund the money up front. So they truly, truly are innovative, and they are really changing the whole dynamic of e-commerce in Africa, and my bet is that they will become the Alibaba of Africa. That's what I believe. So if we go just quickly back to China, and that's why it'll resonate with Africa, is that everyone goes, okay, to where to for China next, considering that that only 57% of their population has internet access, they've got all this control in the B2C space, is that those B2B sales that I was talking about earlier, that 2.8 trillion, that's B2C. B2B is worth $8 trillion online. And the logic tells you that if you, and the research as well, tells you that if you control the B2C market, it's very likely that you'll control the B2B market. So that, for me, is where I believe China's going in the short term, and the potential for Jumia to go in the long term. If we look at Africa, the opportunities in Africa, by 2020, half of all Africans will have smartphones. Massive, massive smartphone penetration. And by 2026, the spending power of the economy or people will be up to $2.1 trillion. So I want to leave you with sort of 5 trends. They're not from me. They're from a site called Trend Searcher. So I just thought that they were really good and they resonated. So the 5 trends for Africa in e-commerce that we believe are really that e-commerce retailers need to pay attention to, and I think Arthur's research and the research that we've done will substantiate this. Is the first one is welcome to the bazaar. So what that means is, in Africa, everyone goes to marketplaces to buy their goods. There's a whole bunch of traders. They all get together. They get to compare. They get to haggle. It's loud. It's noisy. But that tends to be the trend, that there may be one consolidated platform with many traders as opposed to multiple individual niche websites. We see Takealot locally doing this quite well. The second is to master delivery. So Africans become really privy. They also want same-day delivery. They see it happening in the US, they see it happening in China, and the brands and retailers that are really going to capture this environment or to really do well in Africa will master fulfillment and will come up with very innovative solutions in how to get packages delivered. And as I said before, Arthur will touch on this, tends to be a real problem in South Africa and Africa as a whole. The third one is being proudly African. What we mean by that is selling local goods, right? So overseas it may be Yeezys, it may be, all those sorts of products, but locally it actually allows Africans to purchase local products, but also sell those products globally. And with higher and higher trade restrictions coming in, it'll probably be a great thing for them to be able to sell more of their products online. Caring is crucial. What that means is that in the past, merchants have tended to maybe mistreat African consumers, and they haven't always had great experiences. And what's happening is that breaks down trust, and that is a crucial point. And good retailers or e-commerce retailers will really put a huge focus on customer service. And finally is the right touch points. There are so many channels that African consumers buy through, that it's really about using data and analytics to send the right message at the right time to the right people. So it is about harnessing that data. So, in summary, I would just like to leave you with a takeout from Jack Ma. And basically, I think the final takeout is, what motivates him? And he says it is his purpose. And he says, this is our purpose. We want to do something good while making money. We trust people more than our products. And we believe that it's building that trust between online retailers and the people, and more importantly, between humans, that will create frictionless interactions that I believe will set up Africa for successful e-commerce in the future. So, thank you very much for having me. I hope you got some good insights out of that. I'm going to hand over to Arthur.
Our next speaker, Professor Arthur Goldstuck. He's not really a professor, but he kind of looks like one, though, don't you think? He is one of the smartest guys that I know. He has been on the Heavy Chef stage before. I think this is his 6th or 7th time. I'm not sure, but it's a lot. And he is confidently the best-known researcher in this country, so we're very privileged to have him. And he is the founder of World Wide Worx, which is one of the most respected research companies in this country. So I'm going to hand over to you, Arthur. Please give him a warm round of applause.
I want to thank Fred for hosting us once again. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to work with Fred and to be on the Heavy Chef stage, which is one of the few events that consistently still draws full houses, both in Johannesburg and Cape Town. I don't know how he does it, but there's definitely a magic to what he does. Yeah, right. What about that Thabo Mbeki guy, huh? So if you want to know the secret of filling a room, speak to Fred. If you want to know the secret of creating a really awesome research report, speak to Bradley Elliott, because Platinum Seed worked closely with us on our study and really lifted it to a level that we've never seen before in our online retail reports. And then finally also to thank Visa for their support of the project, which also made possible a very wide-ranging project. To put that in context, it's a multi-pronged project with 5 phases to the research. The first is the consumer demographics phase, which we work closely with Ask Africa on. They conduct the TGI survey, which does face-to-face interviews with about 16,000 South Africans every year. And we partner with them in structuring the questions around e-commerce, electronics, the internet, and the like. And the partnership allows us then exclusive rights to packaging the findings in our reports. That will be the first section that I'll present this evening. The second phase was an industry survey amongst online retailers in South Africa. We did the questionnaire construction with Platinum Seed, and then they conducted the survey as well with very in-depth interviews with online retailers in South Africa. And then through direct interviews and discussions with CEOs of major online retailers, we were able to accumulate the numbers that we'll be presenting tonight, because very often they won't divulge those numbers in surveys, but will if there's an agreement that you will only use them in aggregates. So that's how we tend to get our numbers that are not otherwise available. Then we also, over the years, have developed a model for understanding digital take-up in South Africa called the Digital Participation Curve, and we keep evolving that model, and that's a crucial element in understanding the growth of online retail in South Africa. And then finally, what Brad presented now was a snapshot, excuse me, a snapshot of a global trends analysis that he's provided for our report as well, a very in-depth and fascinating analysis that adds to our own ongoing annual analysis of global trends. So you'll see elements of each of these in the presentation coming up. First, the demographics that I'd like to share with you. But first, I want to ask you, how many of you have shopped online? So it's like 95% in this room have shopped online. How many of you have been in a Tesla when it was in autonomous mode and it crashed? 0. So what that tells you is that all South Africans are shopping online, or 95%, and Tesla is completely safe in autonomous mode in South Africa, because there's never been a fatal accident in that circumstance. Well, that's what statistics can tell you if you speak to the wrong audience. And typically, people imagine that the market looks like themselves. So, for example, if you ask people in this kind of room, how many of you use an iPhone? How many of you use an iPhone? Wow, 50%. People will think that the rest of the market is like them, and therefore 50% of South Africans are using iPhones, and the reality is only 5% are using iPhones in this country. So one has to understand the sample frame that one is using, and that's why when we present the findings of the proportion or penetration of online retail in South Africa, people are always surprised because they imagine everyone else is shopping online because they are. Well, the reality is this. Firstly, by age, the proportion or the penetration of regular shoppers in each age group. So the peak is from 25 to 34. Just under 4% are shopping regularly online. So it's tiny. So clearly the market doesn't look anything like yourselves. But what this graph tells you, more importantly, is the strong relationship between age and shopping online, or more specifically, between being above a certain age and shopping online. And what this clearly shows us is that people who came of age, or rather began working before the internet went mainstream in South Africa in the late 1990s, and therefore are now in their late 40s, have a dramatically lower propensity to shop online than anyone younger than them. It rises slightly, but only ever so slightly, after the age of 65, and that's related to disposable income, not working, and having a lot of time to browse and get confident with the internet. But aside from that, this is a very dramatic revelation in terms of the relationship between the the time of starting your working career and your likelihood of shopping online. Also highly significant is the gender divide. Who shops more online, men or women? Half of you are wrong. Significantly more likely to shop online are women. And this, in fact, ties into the fact that clothes shopping is mostly done by women in this country, and the highest proportion of stores per category is in apparel, and the highest growth area is in apparel. So that ties in strongly with the fact that there are more, there's a greater likelihood of products being offered online being aimed at women than at men, and that results in a stark difference between the two. Then by employment status, and the interesting thing here is that there's a similar penetration between those working full-time and those not working at all. But bear in mind, those not working at all are not unemployed, they choose not to be working, so either retired or they're students, or they live at home, or they have independent income. But it means that that is not the distinction. It's if they're unemployed that they're far less likely to be shopping online. And then possibly the most interesting of all, because there are so many stories to tell in this next graph, is marital status. And what's fascinating here is that when you get divorced, you suddenly go shopping online. So a lot of comfort shopping happening. And that's a great opportunity for online retailers to target specific audiences. You're least likely to shop online when you're separated, because you betwixt and between, you don't know what's happening next, and you're a bit nervous about spending your money. But the moment you're fully divorced, then there's no limits. And then finally, we worked with Ask Africa to develop a profile of online shoppers, to see if there was a difference between the kind of attitude to the internet and online retail and other areas of technology, and the likelihood of shopping online. And we identified two broad categories: the tech laggards, those who were nervous of technology, didn't like the internet, were suspicious and distrustful, and then those that were confident in using the internet, were trustful of technology and the like, and we called those the tech trendsetters. And there we found the greatest distinction between those shopping online, or at least in the likelihood of shopping online, 10% versus 6%, which in terms of the sample size is statistically highly significant. So tech savviness still drives online retail to a large extent, and it is, as opposed to traditional retail where there's no relationship between technology or what tools you use and whether you're going to go shopping in stores. But that also speaks to the immaturity of online retail in South Africa, that it's not fully mainstream. It has begun going mainstream, but once it becomes fully mainstream, then there shouldn't be such a gap between tech laggards and tech trendsetters, because technology won't dictate your use of this medium. Then we move on to the key drivers of online retail success and what strategies online retailers use. This comes from the industry survey that we conducted with Platinum Seed. One of the big findings was that most online retailers are afraid of investing too heavily. And we found that only 1 in 5 companies invested more than 20% of the proceeds of online retail back into the digital space or into their online presence. And a very small proportion were betting big. 7%, or just under 7%, were likely to spend more than R1 million on their online presence in 2018. And then a further 43% between R100,000 and R1 million. And in terms of business investment and taking risks, that's a fairly low level risk that's being taken, fairly low levels of investment, should I rather say. And what one must bear in mind here is the traditional mantra, although Brad showed that there's a big difference between Amazon's profits and Alibaba's profits, but the mantra of Jeff Bezos in the early days of Amazon, when it's my all-time favorite quote in online retail. So if you've heard me say this before, please bear with me. I like saying it. He was asked, when will Amazon make a profit? And this was in 1996. And he said, we won't make a profit for at least the next 5 years. If we do, we'll be in big trouble. And what he meant by that was that it was so important for them to reinvest all their returns back into their systems in order to ensure long-term sustainability, that if they made a profit sooner than that, it meant they were jeopardizing the long-term future of the business. In this country, we are seeing a high proportion of early-stage online retailers making a profit. There's nothing wrong with making a profit, but 71% of respondents making a profit is fairly high, and it's highly positive, but it also could be a cause for concern. And when you combine that with the fact that so little is being reinvested back into businesses, it starts telling you a different story. It tells you that profit is more important than long-term sustainability. So it's a key strategic warning in terms of long-term planning for turnover, for investment, for profit. Where we're seeing a positive trend is in the level of turnover of online retailers. A third reported more than 10 million rand turnover for last year, and another third reported between 1 and 10 million rand turnover. For 2018, we saw similar turnover in the 1 to 10 million rand range, but 38% expected turnover of more than 10 million rand for 2018. That's up from 33% in 2017. And then in 2019, 45% expected to turn over more than 10 million rand. So you can see a rising graph of the proportion of companies that will have more than 10 million rands turnover. And it's a rapidly rising graph from 33% to 38% to 45%. So you can see the rapid growth in turnover occurring across the board. What are the key success factors for online retailers? There were 4 key ones that we identified in the research. Number 1 was customer service, almost unanimous, 98% of respondents. Number 2 was a wide range of products, close to unanimous, 94%. And then online user experience, still 9 out of 10 respondents rated that as important. And just below that, customer relations management, 88%. I was really hoping it'd be only 3 that stand out, and I could talk about the golden triangle. Instead, I've got to talk about something boring like the golden square of online retail success. But this is the golden square. All the other factors, and there were numerous ones, fell way below these 4. So if you want to look for a blueprint for online retail success, this is where you need to focus your investment, your energy, and your effort. The 2 biggest challenges, again, out of a wide range of challenges, these 2 stood out, was ensuring fulfillment isn't disrupted. 48% said that that's their biggest challenge. That's half of the respondents. And they're not too far behind that, accurately forecasting so that there aren't stock shortages. And this one was very sector dependent as well. So in the electronics sector, for example, it was far higher than for any others. And that's because of the nature of gadgetry. When a new product comes out, you have no idea what kind of buzz is going to create, what kind of demand for that product. Who knew in 2011 that BlackBerry was suddenly going to go from 4% to 25%? Janice Spark here knew, because Idea Engineers were their PR agency back then. And that was our forecast, and it took the market by surprise. But then who knew in 2014 that BlackBerry would suddenly vanish from the market? Not the people who stocked up heavily in the latest BlackBerry 10 products. So it tells you the extent to which the buzz around electronics and also the seasonal nature around the launches of electronics create a nightmare for the retailers themselves, because they simply cannot forecast. So that is the other massive challenge. From here we move on to the numbers themselves, and this is what a lot of people really are waiting to hear. We're going to start with looking at traditional retail. These aren't our numbers in terms of the overall retail market, and this is traditional products bought in retail outlets. This is from UNISA's Bureau of Market Research. We've been following their numbers for the last decade or so. And last year, for the first time, traditional retail passed the trillion rand mark in South Africa. This year, it rises to 1.078 trillion rand. So it's a massive retail market, and the assumption is that this represents a massive opportunity for online retail. It does, but not as big as people imagine. Before showing you those numbers, I want to show you what growth rate this represents. And suddenly it doesn't look so healthy, because since 2008, in fact for the last 10 years, the growth of traditional retail has never been above 10%. And for the last couple of years, it's been averaging around 7.2%. The growth in online retail, in contrast, has never been below 20%. In fact, not since we started measuring has it been below 20%. What's interesting is that right in the beginning of this graph, you can see a rapidly declining curve as it started on a very low base and then almost vanished. And part of the reason for that is that people simply weren't ready for online retail in South Africa. There was a massive explosion in investment in online retail around 2001, and that resulted in a spike in sales, but then these stores closed down as fast as they started up, and you saw it collapsing very quickly. And then it began climbing again. We predicted at the time that 2006 would see the start of growth in online retail, and that in fact happened, and it helped us to develop a model called the digital participation curve, which shows that the longer people are online, the more likely they are to shop online. And what we found was that 5 years was a key number. Once people have been online for 5 years, they have the propensity to shop online. That doesn't mean they are shopping online. It means they can be converted to shopping online. But numerous people have taken that propensity, gone to buy something online, and fulfillment is broken down, and they've never gone back. And that's partly why the numbers are so low, because the early years of online retail in this country have seen such incredibly bad fulfillment. The key figures, though, are for last year and this year, where we saw it climbing from the 2016 figure of 20%, where we expected it to carry on dropping, and suddenly it rose again, 25% last year and 25% this year. A big factor there was the massive injection of cash into Takealot, which had R1 billion put into the business as a war chest for expansion. Among other things, they then bought Mr. Delivery as a way to provide very quick and very cheap fulfillment. So addressing that fulfillment gap very aggressively. And this year, based on our interviews and discussions with CEOs of major online retailers, we're expecting to see the same growth. And then next year, we're being slightly conservative, expecting it to dip a little to 20%, but it's not going to slow down anytime soon because of the level of investment and the aggressive marketing that's going into online retail. Just to put that 20% into context, this is the global picture, and the red bars show the percentage, the red line rather shows the percentage growth year on year. And you can see for the last 2 years, 23% and 21%, not very different to our 25%. And then for the next 2 years, 19% and 17%, again, not very different to our 20%. So in terms of growth rate, we are tracking global trends. But the key number we're not tracking is percentage of total retail. And that's the blue line you see. And you can see in 2012, it passed the 2017, it passed the 10% mark for the first time, hitting 11.5% this year. So what are the South African numbers? I'll keep you in suspense for a moment longer, but I will share with you the key numbers of online retail in South Africa. Firstly, last year, it reached 11.3 billion rand, representing 25% growth over 2016. In 2018, it's going to reach 14.1 billion rand, based on that same 25% growth rate. And this does take into account, because I know people will ask, it does take into account the huge spike expected in Black Friday sales this coming month. And that is partly what will ensure the continued 25% growth rate for this year and 20% growth rate next year, is that we're expecting to see Black Friday taking off in a massive way in South Africa. And then we expect to see growth continuing at 20% for the next 2 years, which will bring it close to the 20 billion rand mark by 2020. I love neat figures, and 20 billion rand 2020 works so nicely that we're going to try to push online retail sales so that it grows at 21% a year, and then it will reach 20 billion by 2020. But seriously, what I mean by that is that it just takes a little additional push for it, and it'll crack that massive psychological barrier of 20 billion rand by the end of the decade. And then what percentage of total retail does online retail make up? Bear in mind, last year globally was 10.1%. This year, around 11.5%. Well, we're a little behind that. Last year was 1.12% in South Africa, and this year slightly healthier, 1.46%. So very slow growth. And even if that annual rate of growth remains at 25%, even if it goes up to 33%, because total retail is so big, and because total retail is also growing off a much higher base, even though the growth is slower, it means that even rapid online retail growth won't result in that figure growing too fast. It means that we only reach the 2% mark by about 2022. So it still represents a tiny fraction of traditional retail. And one of the key factors, aside from the retailers themselves, which I'll come to in a moment, is the reality of mall culture in South Africa. South Africans are still creatures of the mall, and that's why we're still seeing, it sounds like a great horror movie, and actually it is a horror movie, but it's the reason why we are seeing new malls springing up all the time. And I think we're in the top 5 in the world in terms of malls per capita, and certainly new malls per capita, we're probably number 1 in the world. So what does the future hold for online retail? How do we overcome these issues? Well, the fundamental issue is the lack of reinvestment by online retailers themselves in the digital underpinnings of their businesses. So that's the first thing that they can do. But more broadly than that, in terms of strategy in online retail, we believe that the future will belong to those who are customer-centric above everything else, who learn from the mistakes of others, who transform their operational weaknesses into strength through innovations of the kind that Brad was referencing earlier, what we are seeing in China and in Nigeria. And most fundamentally, we regard people as more important than product. Thank you.
So our next speaker, Ailyssa Pretorius, is we've asked Ellissa to come on just because of a different perspective. We wanted to look at the mobile transaction segment and really kind of look at the data behind it and look what that reveals in terms of consumer behavior and any insights that can share. So super excited to have Ellissa on our stage for the first time. Please give her a warm round of applause. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and thanks for having me. I can proudly say I am a heavy chef. I'm absolutely passionate about what I do. I live and breathe Uber Eats, and unfortunately, I think it could make me a heavier chef through some poor habits. And really what I'm here to talk to you about is how Uber used what we knew to identify a need. I figure out a way to address a need, and then listen very carefully to ensure that we are able to iterate on what we brought into a market space, and continue to innovate using data, consumer feedback, and tech to get to a world where we want to be in 2020. And that's kind of what I wanted to share with you today. So I'm sure that everybody in the room knows about Uber. Also found out of need. The founders sat in Paris. They were cold. They needed a car. They didn't know how to find a taxi, and that's kind of how Uber came about. But very soon after, we started to really get excited about becoming super efficient and reliable and getting people from point A to point B. The question started to come about: what else could we do with this tech that we sit on? And Uber created something called Uber Everything. And I think that was the first moment of starting to think beyond what we had traditionally thought we would be in the market. And Uber Everything was a bunch of people who really understood the product, really understood what we were doing, and wanted to figure out what else could we do at the touch of the button, or what else did people need? And they thought about that typical moment of, opening a menu that was kind of tatty on your fridge, placing an order on a phone with somebody who didn't really understand what a pad thai was, and then waiting for some universe to magically let someone ring your doorbell and bring you your food. And that's kind of how Uber Eats evolved. They really wanted to be able to bring your food where you wanted it. And what's interesting about the way that happened is kind of started with this concept of Uber Fresh. So this was version 1. It sat in the Rides app. It came out of Toronto, and it was very hacky. So there were a bunch of restaurants, not a lot, just 5, serving a few items of food. And the idea was to get food to people in 10 minutes. And what we very quickly realized were 2 main things. One, people really cared about speed, but they cared more about variety. So having 5 restaurants with 5 meals just wasn't enough. And 2, an eating experience is fundamentally different to a riding experience. And so it didn't quite make sense to keep these 2 things in the same app. And so they went back to the drawing board, and 2 years later they launched Uber Eats, kind of V1 here and where we are today. Actually, this is a little bit outdated. We've rebranded quite recently. And in just over 2 years, 30 countries, 200 cities, and partnering with more than 80,000 restaurant partners. What really excites me is thinking about the number of economic opportunities that this has really created from a delivery partner perspective. And so the South African story is we were city number 37 to launch Uber Eats in South Africa. We launched in September 2016. Some top of mind stats is we're in 6 cities. We recently launched PE. We have more than 2,000 restaurant partners. We've got more than 2,000 delivery partners on the road. There's more than 50,000 items that you can order on the app at this point in time, and the team has really seen scale at a big way. So we started covering 80 square kilometers of the country, and now we cover 10% of the population in 2,500 square kilometers. So really rapid growth in a 2-year period. But this is where the data starts to kick in. So how did we actually decide where to go, when to go, how to go? And this is the first thing we did, was being really smart about where to be, and that we leveraged what we knew and what we had. So what we started to do is look at eyeballs. So every time you open the app, we kind of know where your geolocation is. And that started to help us understand where are the concentration of people who are opening up the Uber Eats app post-launch, because we launched in this very small area, and how do we start to address their need, because we know they want us because they're opening our app. And that kind of led a huge part of our expansion strategy, which was pretty aggressive last year. This is a crazy graph. But basically, and this is one of the foundationals that Arthur touched on, was making sure that you're customer-centric, and then making sure that you have your foundations or your operations absolutely on point. And so we spent a lot of time getting very granular on creating a consistent experience. So using these kind of data points, and what this kind of looks at is where are demand concentrations. All of these lines are drivers, looking at where they're coming from, looking at where they're going to, and using that to get a deep understanding of what we should be doing to make sure that food gets to consumers as quickly as we possibly can get it. And that it doesn't matter if you're sitting in this corner of Johannesburg or right at the top, that the experience you experience is universal. Then we thought about using the data to get a little bit smarter about really partnering with our restaurants. So how do we start to use data? And this is obviously, this is not real data, this is for the purposes of this, but how do we start using, one, search data, so understanding what people are looking for, understanding where they're looking for it, and then understanding where the concentration of something specific is. So this is a cuisine example, actually. This is looking at pizza, and this is looking at how people order pizza at lunch versus dinner, where they're searching for it more, where they're ordering it more. And using this data, we can go to our restaurant partners and say, hey, do you know there's no pizza in this corner of Cape Town? We really think you should get there. How do we partner with you to help use this data to understand what the demand looks like here, to understand if there's a viable financial model for you? And then again here, how do we start thinking better about the end user? So, and I'll talk about all the things that we learned and started to identify the problems that we want to solve shortly, but how do we make it easier for the end user to decide what they want for lunch? I think we've all been there, where you're starving and you just don't know what you feel like for dinner, and making sure that we provide the capability in app and a seamless application for users to go and search and find what they want, but then use this data to drive what we do. So when you go into an app and you keep on searching Thai and you never convert, so you're never actually going into your cart and placing an order, we're using that data to tailor our sales team strategy to understand that we need Thai in this specific area. Because even if we do have Thai and you're finding a Thai restaurant, it's obviously not the right Thai restaurant if you're not placing the order. And so these are just some basic examples of how we're really using the data that we sit on to listen to our consumer at scale and to build something that's hyper relevant to what the market is looking for. So we kind of set ourselves this mission, which is making eating well effortless every day for everyone. And we've was our first mission statement. It still is our mission statement. But what we started to unpack as we got older and a little bit wiser was actually this is a lot harder than it looks. So we can make people eat because there's an app and there's restaurants. That's not too tough. But making them eat well, making it effortless, making it available for everybody are real challenges that we face as a business and challenges that we're trying to overcome. So eaters are you, so they're the consumers. And what we found is that there's two types of eating occasions. There's experiential eating. So this is going out with your mates and having a good dinner and a glass of wine and really enjoying something different. And this is usually joyful. But then there's a massive piece of practical eating. And that's kind of what we're after, is what is practical eating and how do we make sure that we play in that practical eating space. And when you think immediately of who are the competitors of Uber Eats, there's obvious alternate third-party delivery partners, but there's grocery, and there's your fridge, and there's retailers. And there's a bigger piece of how many meals are these, and we've worked them out to be 22 point something. And how do we capture more of those moments for you, to buy back time for you, to do better things. But this was the first thing that we figured out, was that we were trying to make eating well effortless for everybody, but every time people were making a food choice, they kind of they had to balance one of three things. So one was choice, and that is, I kind of want a healthy meal, or I call them dirty meals, or what do I actually feel like? And thinking through that is sometimes hard, and we don't really know the answer to that all the time. The second one is budget. So I'm sure we'd all love, a good truffle pasta every night for dinner, but that's probably not feasible or very good for you. And then lastly, convenience. So how much time do I actually have? I mean, we're very often, I know I find myself in between meetings very often. I've got 15 minutes to spare. So does that mean I have to make a poor choice based on the amount of time that I have? And there's always this kind of sacrifice that happens in this flow. So that was the first key finding, and something that we said we need to try and figure out. The second thing was restaurants. So the restaurants industry in South Africa is a really tough one. I think if you look at some of the statistics about what's happened over the last year from a restaurant perspective, and you can look at it from a casual dining perspective against a quick service restaurant, it's really, it's a very difficult landscape, especially where we are from a macroeconomics perspective. And unfortunately, restaurants have very limited data. So they're very good at doing what they do. But actually, if you think of a typical restaurateur, he wears a ton of hats. He's usually the finance guy, the accounting guy, the chef, the management person, the customer service person. He's a lot of things, and he runs his business with very little data. And how do we help eliminate the risk to restaurant partners was a question that we thought about. And secondly, how do we equip them better to really grow their business? And then we thought about delivery partners. This is this part that really, really excites me, especially in a South African context where unemployment is as high as it is. And this is, delivery shouldn't be hard. So it should be really easy for somebody to use their 2 feet to do a delivery, or get onto a bicycle to do a delivery, or as we do now, get onto a scooter and move from point A to point B to get food to people where they want it. And making that as seamless as possible enables more economic opportunities and also changes the way that people interact with the app. And so this is something that we really wanted to try and achieve. And so as we start to think about making eating well effortless for everyone every day, this is when we started to get a little bit more excited, because we started to realize that the challenges are vast and that there's a ton of things that we can do to make this incredible. And so our challenge was, how do you make access to good food every day? How do we help our restaurants with the knowledge that they need? And how do we make delivery partners' lives easy, seamless, and really a true opportunity for more people? And so I guess what I wanted to share with you today is, what is it like? How are we using all of these data points, all of these insights, these challenges that we've identified through our process to build towards something really, really exciting? And how does this take customer centricity into account? How does this take where we are as a consumer base and a consumer base that's super eager to buy back time into our lives? What does that feel and look like? And so the first thing, which is super exciting and which we're starting to see come up more and more in the online retail space, which is what we've been talking about this evening, is moving from a recommendation to a personalization. So right now, if you go into your app is fundamentally different from your neighbor's, okay? And that's because Uber's using data from your past order history to help feed stuff to you, that using AI, that is relevant to you. But how do we change that? And how do we become super personalized? So how do you get to a world where Uber knows exactly what's in every single meal that a restaurant serves, and then enables full access to the consumer to control that meal that comes to them? What's more is, how do you start to think about that when you're ordering as a group? So how do you start to say, I understand each user's taste profile, and based on that taste profile, I understand how that taste profile works as a group if you're ordering together, or as a family if you're ordering for dinner at home. And I have the ability to then feature to you the restaurant that will service all your needs for your family. I think the one thing that I get super excited about when I think about this piece is, imagine, and this is what we are imagining, a world in which you put on your iWatch your iWatch, your Apple Watch, you go to gym, it knows exactly what calories you've used, or it knows exactly what your goals are for that day. And when you open your Uber Eats app, it links all your data and it says, here's the top recommended meals for the amount of calories that you've burned today, to replenish your protein, to think about exactly what you should be eating so that it's hyper-personalized to what you need. And that's very exciting for me, especially I don't have my watch on today, so I'm standing for no reason. So I think that's super exciting to get, because that's when you start to get very personal and very personalized, and that's when you really start to add convenience into the consumer's life. If we move on to the restaurants, we start to think about how do we get from a stage where right now every single restaurant partner in South Africa, Uber Eats restaurant partner in South Africa, knows some key data points. So how much are they making? When are you ordering? What are their most popular meals? What are some of their ops metrics? Some really basic stuff, and we just kind of give that to them. How do we get to giving them the data to help them run their business a little bit more efficiently and a little bit more targeted? So how do we start to say, every time, has anybody used Uber Eats in the room? Okay, so there is a comment section in Uber Eats, so you can say, I don't want your onions, or I want extra avo. How do we start to use that data to say, actually, your salad is great, but every time people are ordering, they're asking for extra avo, so maybe you should look at this recipe a little bit closer. How do we start to say, actually, what we've seen previously with restaurants who have similar ingredients to what you already have on your menu, that with season, butternut soup is super popular. And so we recommend to you, based on what we know sits in your kitchen, put butternut on your menu, and we can see that this is how it drives demand. I think what's happening already and gets super exciting, and this is at a much bigger scale globally and is already happening in South Africa, is how do we use this data to break down the barriers of opening a restaurant. So right now in South Africa, it's really costly to open a restaurant. You have budding, incredible chefs who don't have a platform to serve food. And how do we start to use this data to feed this back to potential restaurateurs and do things like dark kitchens or virtual kitchens, which are, a dark kitchen is basically a space in which you serve food solely for delivery, and it's built for that purpose, and the kitchen is built to efficiently service food delivery. A virtual kitchen is, I have an existing brick and mortar, I have a contingency of staff, I have a full kitchen worth of ingredients. How do I take my Italian restaurant and become a salad bar under a completely different brand to the consumer at a time where perhaps my assets are not fully utilized, and I'm able to really make sure that my business is reducing food wastage, accelerating the use of its assets, and generating perpetual growth. And so this is kind of the same piece. So how do we then start to, and I think this talks to a bigger part of our sustainability and our impact on the environment, is how do we start to understand stock levels for restaurants? So I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with how a restaurant's POS, point of sale, works, etc. But actually, item level ingredients and stock management and POS is not well integrated at this point in time. So restaurants are kind of doing stock counts in the back end. They don't have their menus necessarily built into their POS. And so how do we start to identify upfront for a restaurant partner, hey, do you know you've got way too much lettuce in the back room? And do you know that if you take lettuce and kale, I'm going to come off the awful recipe, but if you take lettuce and this other ingredient that we know you already stock, you can make this item that people are searching for and is super popular in your very geo-specific area. And so all of a sudden we start to help them optimize what they're already sitting on. And then from a driver point of view, I think there's super exciting stuff happening. So there's experimentation on drone delivery, which I think is interesting. I can't imagine, a bunch of Mackie D's fries flying past your face. But there's pieces on how do you get food in a very different way to consumers, and how do you think about this from a South African context in a more bigger picture way. So how do you start to think about people who live very far away from a restaurant, or people who live very far away from the closest shop, and where public transportation is not as easy as it is in other countries perhaps? How do we start to think about alternative mechanisms to get food to people quicker and easier? In this piece specifically, what we're doing is building tech to make the driver's experience a lot better. So how do we start to... I always think about the one thing that we want to do, and I always take it out of my slides, is we want to do this thing where a driver can, or a delivery partner can drop your food off at your front door and just pop you a message and say, your food's there, I'm not going to knock on your door and disturb your sleeping child. And I always wonder how this would work in a South African context. But I think what's really exciting is how do we start to make their lives easier, safer? How do we start to use very smart technology to build very insightful details to delivery partners so that they're safe on the road, and so that they can get deliveries done quicker, easier, and so that they can be part of this income generating opportunity. Yeah, this is just some other exciting stuff. So I think what's really important for us, and I think what's really complicated about our business model, is bringing these three parts of our business model together in a collaborative fashion, and in a way that's forward-looking, and in a way that's customer-centric. And I think what's interesting about Uber Eats specifically is that we have many customers to think about, and bringing those all together holistically to really provide something that does make eating effortless for everyone every day a possibility becomes a super, super exciting proposition. And that's me.
Thank you, Ellie. That was amazing. Really insightful. It also gives us a really good perspective on those little screens that I think are going to become more and more and more and more important in terms of consumer transactional behavior. So thank you very much for that. I just want to say a massive thank you to our three speakers tonight. I thought you did exemplary presentations, and I certainly took out a lot. So thank you very much. Can we please give them a round of applause? Guys, we're going to close it off with that, but I just wanted to also say a massive thank you to you guys for giving up your Wednesday night and for supporting Heavy Chef. It really means a lot to us and our team. Thank you so much, guys.